All right. Good evening, good day, everyone, where we're joining from. Let's get going with our session today. So we've got quite a few, things to cover in the next 60 plus minutes or so. Primarily, we had done a session of this type, about say a couple of months back, sometime in December. Since then, there's been a lot of updates in terms of Google MCP servers. There's just a number of MCP servers which are now available for all of us to try out, and that brings about also a few interesting use cases. As we bring it together. So my goal is not to just simply go through each MCP server and tell you that okay, it's got all of these tools available, but I'll just show you the art of what's possible when you are able to combine several of these MCP servers, and just use natural language to invoke all of that. Having said that, before we get going, we're going to be following the same sort of rules in terms of putting your questions or any other comments which you want in the chat. Anyone is free to answer. Towards the end, again, we can take a consolidated Q&A also. And keep in mind that we'll make the recording available to all of you, probably in a day or two. So don't worry about these slides or recording or anything of that sort. It will all be there for you. So having said that, let's get going with our session. I'm just going to slideshow mode. Okay. All right. So the goal over here, I mean, in terms of what we have for an agenda is just take you through some of the MCP servers that have come out since we had our last session in December. And then we'll again revisit what it means to configure any of these MCP servers vis-a-vis your Google Cloud projects, which services to enable, and then what are some of the things you may have to do inside of your, say, AI agent that we're using. We'll primarily be using Gemini CLI today, but you can potentially configure this in any other AI agent that supports MCP. We'll touch upon a bit of the security aspect of it also. And then finally, the key thing is going to be to just show you various use cases that are possible with this. Just maybe a couple of slides on stating the obvious, and I'm sure you've all been familiar with Model Context Protocol and what it's enabled over the last 1 to 2 years. So in short, it's a protocol that standardizes how your AI applications would connect to external data and tools. And it's brought about some method to the whole madness of connecting to various APIs, tools, and writing your own custom integrations, and then also worrying about what if those APIs change or they go through versioning or some schema changes and so on. So pretty much there's some magic happening behind the scenes by which it's allowed us to connect our AI agents in a standard fashion to external data, which is important. We need to ground our stuff, or not our stuff, the agents, in terms of this data. So sometimes I'll just pause a bit to admit a few folks. So don't worry about that. Okay. Now, this slide is important in a sense that it sets the context in terms of how does this whole thing work, and the way it works is, again, you might have come across MCP servers and probably you've also set them up locally. This is different in a sense that these are remote MCP servers and these are MCP servers on Google Cloud. These are managed completely by Google Cloud. And obviously, there's also a tight integration with your various Google Cloud services, slash, security postures, etc. So we'll come to all of that. But the way you want to look at this is that various Google Cloud services. So you probably start from the right in this diagram which is shown. Again, I've only shown you a few of these, which are like BigQuery, Maps, GK, GCE, but obviously, I think as of last count, probably 18 to 20 such services are now available for you to access via the standard MCP protocol. Again, these are fully managed, services from Google. And again, when it comes to the whole protocol aspect, again, that, as I mentioned, is taken care of by the streamable HTTP, one of the transports that MCP protocol supports. And by the very nature of it, you can really configure this in any kind of a client that is able to support this protocol. So this could be, agents like Gemini CLI or Anti-Gravity or Claude, but it could also be your own agents, which you may write using probably an agent development kit out there. So as long as you are able to talk the MCP protocol from a client perspective, you should be able to connect to any of these services, right? So again, this picture is a bit limited in a sense that these are not the only Google Cloud services that are available right now over MCP. We'll take a look at which ones are available. And I'm sure in the next week or two, probably there'll be further more services that could get added. But it just gives you a big level picture in terms of where it's going on. Keep in mind, this is again fully managed. So all you need to do is, like any other fully managed service on Google Cloud, you would need to just follow some instructions in terms of enabling the APIs or the MCP endpoints and setting up a few things from IAM and any other security services that you wish to integrate with. Now, let's move forward on this. So, what are the MCP servers that are currently available as of right now, right? Again, I put there and more. So these are definitely not, again, the only list of services that have been exposed now via MCP. But keep in mind that you get a sense of how the whole thing is going, right? So we started off with our data services. Again, that's important because eventually, from an enterprise perspective or from folks that are using Google Cloud, they might be having a lot of their data, on Google Cloud in one of those various services, etc. So obviously, it's good to have those MCP endpoints now enabled for that. We'll take a look at several of these things, but what I want you to start thinking about is that each of these MCP servers would have a list of tools. For example, let's say Google Maps, for example, that would have things like probably search for places or determine a route or driving directions and things like that. Similarly, cloud logging, if you're familiar with cloud logging, Google Cloud, you should start expecting certain tools to be there. Like, okay, there should be things to maybe get access to the logs, maybe filter out by log names or any other filtering parameter. Compute engine, again, think of some tools that could allow you to create instances, maybe update them or get some other machine types and so on, right? And of course, from SQL and Firestore perspective, if you're familiar with these services, expect them to have somewhat relatable tools. You might find that at times there are certain tools maybe you would have expected. Maybe there's a way they'll probably introduce them as we go along. So these may not be the things that are finalized, but it's a constant thing in motion. Now, what I'll do is, just for the moment, to tell you that these are not the MCP servers only, let me just for a moment go to this URL and show you the supported products. Yeah, I had it open, but that's fine. So this is currently the page which you have for different MCP servers. And if you just look at the range of services which are now available via MCP servers, it's quite a bit. So you will find that for each one of them, you have these two are the columns which you see. Probably the reference gives you all the tools that are there. And of course, any kind of guides in terms of, could be best practices, could be some sample prompts that you could use and so on. Now, just as a quick way by which you could navigate some of these things, for example, if you go to, let's say, Firestore, and if you go to the MCP reference for Firestore, you will find that, the tools, which ones are exposed, you can see the entire list over here. Obviously, if you're familiar with configuring any MCP servers in your AI agents, you would also be comfortable with the fact that, yes, if I'm able to configure that MCP server correctly in something like a Gemini CLI or a Claude, I should be able to see these tools, which are then open for the AI agent to eventually choose, depending upon the intent in your prompt. But again, just to summarize this one quickly, you've got quite a few of services that are available. Most of this action at least happened in the last month or so. It's quickly being added to. We'll touch upon several of these. We'll then also combine several of these in interesting use cases as we go. Yeah. All right. So going back to the thing, let's now start beginning to probably touch upon something which we had covered in December, but it's important to just go through it once again. So how do you set these up, in your, let's say, Google Cloud project, or how do you configure the whole thing, right? So again, simple set of steps are there, right, where you've got to do with enabling the API. So obviously, start with the construct of a Google Cloud project. And so for the project, you know that let's keep Google MCP servers away for now. Even otherwise, you would know that in order to use certain services in Google Cloud Project, you need to enable certain APIs. So that sort of step remains obviously there, that yes, let's make sure that these APIs are enabled. So for example, I want to use Firestore, or I want to use Cloud SQL, or I want to use, let's say, Compute Engine. Obviously, I enable those APIs first. Now, each of these services which are now available as MCP servers, that's the second step now, which is how do we now enable the MCP endpoint for it? So there's a certain gcloud command. It's available currently in beta. And there's also, if you've been following this for a while, somewhere after mid-March, they're going to just make the MCP server also enabled in case you enable the API. So probably step 1 and 2 might be sort of combined over there. And yeah, okay, there's Google or GCP MCP server. There are a few services from Google side, like for example, the developer knowledge, there's maps. So yeah, maybe I'll need to be a little bit more careful whether I say Google MCP or GCP MCP, but let's assume it's the umbrella of various services that are currently being exposed as an MCP server. Step 3 is obviously that, and I will touch upon a little bit more on this when we cover security, is this is closely tied to your Google Cloud Project security constructs that you've been familiar with. So obviously, you know that, the agent, for example, in this case, the agent will be talking to the MCP server. So you need to be aware that, okay, what is the principal, or what is the account, or what is the identity that the agent will be assuming when it talks to these MCP servers. So obviously, let's say that maybe you use a service account, that you set up the service account. The important thing is the access, permissions. So basically, the role that it will take up, whether it is allowed to even invoke the MCP tools, or it's even allowed to perform some of the operations. For example, if you're trying to create a Compute Engine instance, maybe you need to also have maybe a Compute Engine instance admin or Compute Engine admin role to do those functions. So it's not just the identity that you're allowed to call the MCP server, but it also, or basically step 3 also involves that you need to be giving the right roles in order for that principal to invoke it. And it's pretty straightforward once you get the hang of it. And of course, step 4 is whether you use Gemini, CLI, Claude, or you write your own agents, probably a bit of setup needed over there in order to talk to it. So in summary, Google Cloud Project, enable the APIs, enable the MCP endpoint, and then you set up the right roles, permissions, etc., and you should be fine. So for example, I will just, for a moment, or let me do this. I'm just going to switch over to my terminal for a moment. And over here, let's say that I'm using the gcloud stuff. So for example, everything is normal here, which you're familiar with gcloud. So if I look at the config list, I've got my own projects and other things all set up. The authentication, etc., is done. You have basically a beta command right now for MCP. So if I just put this right now, obviously I didn't say what to do. So there's beta services, sorry. So if we just put this, you will see that what is it telling you to do? Is it telling you to enable a particular MCP endpoint, the step 2, or maybe even list out or disable? So for my project, just to show you that I've been playing around with these for a while, I've enabled several MCP endpoints. So again, you just have to do a G Cloud beta services MCP enable, and then the name of the MCP service which you want to do. So in my case here for this project, I have enabled all of these MCP endpoints, and you see the endpoint also available there. So again, keep in mind that by default right now, just by enabling the API, the MCP endpoint is not enabled, but there are changes in the documentation that are pointing to the fact that this might be enabled by default if you enable any of the APIs. Of course, that doesn't mean you can still call it, because you need to set the right role as well as the permissions. We'll see that in a while. So hopefully this gives you some sense in terms of Google Cloud Project. Enable the services. You got the MCP endpoint enabled. For now, I'm currently going to be using Gemini CLI. I'm using the authentication that's done via G Cloud. So it will pretty much be my account right now that has been given the right permissions to do the work. Let me go back to the presentation. Okay. So moving forward, right, just optionally, I wanted to show this also, is that like the step 4. So if I just go back to those 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Step 4 says configure AI agent. So once the MCP server is enabled in your project, remember this is a remote MCP server. It's fully managed by Google Cloud. So you don't need to do anything about starting the MCP server or anything of that. So that's like taken care of by Google. But still, you need to configure the AI agents. So if you're familiar, for example, in this case here, I'm taking an example of Gemini, CLI, configure your ID. I'm sorry, not IDA. It just shows that I'm typing this. It's not generated. Okay. But in Gemini CLI example out here, you need to, inside of the MCP servers block, you need to set up several of these MCPs, which you want to enable. I'll share a few other resources also. I'll just go there for a moment. I've got this GitHub sample here, which is just showing you the various MCP servers that I've set up on my machine. And it's giving you this code snippet so that you could possibly just take it and put it in your settings also. Obviously, you need to get some keys and other things. But otherwise, pretty much, if you will see, for example, if it's Cloud SQL MCP, the HTTP endpoint, this endpoint is not invented, out of nothing. If you go over here, for example, you will see Cloud SQL, then what's the MCP server endpoint? That's the one that you're connecting to. And if you look at the authentication, as I told you, is the Google credentials used there itself. You have to give a scope. I'll share with you other resources that sort of highlight how potentially a scope can be used in conjunction with what your roles, permissions could be. We don't have to really dig into that for the moment. I can take in some questions later, but I'll share with you enough resources that sort of make sense of all of these things. But for now, keep in mind, these are fully managed MCP servers. So all you are doing is configuring the MCP server specifically in, let's say, a Gemini CLI, Claude, whatever be their settings out there. Just pointing to the URL, telling what's the authentication method going to be, and your specific GCP project ID. So obviously, make sure that whatever be your project ID, the MCP endpoint is enabled for that. Now, if configured correctly, so for example, if I go to, let's say, where do I go? Let me think for a moment. Okay, so I'm going to just quit out of Gemini CLI for a moment. And obviously in my settings JSON, I've done all of those MCP servers. So if I start up Gemini, and this could be your respective other AI agent too, I could simply do a MCP list over here, and you will see that there are several MCP servers. All of these are now sort of ready. So for example, the maps one, the Cloud SQL one, BigQuery, whatever, all of these are configured. Obviously, you don't want to configure so many tools also. Some of you might have already noticed a few things, right? For example, what is this funny tool called Compute Engine MCP __ create instance? Well, actually, the tool name is create instance, But since create instance is also there as tools in another MCP server, basically the AI agent or Gemini CLI in this case, when it loads up, in order to avoid the conflict, it's sort of taken the name and then prefix that. So this way, you'll have to be a little bit careful to not have, don't do what I've done over here, which is to just overload it with like tens and tens of tools over here. But I just did it so that to show you that any MCP server that you configure, make sure it is configured correctly. And if you come and do an MCP list over here, or just to whatever be that respective thing for the AI agent, you should be able to see the tools that are also documented. So that's precisely what was being done over here. So you configure it, and what you're seeing on the right is simply a MCP list command. Now, going back to the presentation, a little bit on security, and then we'll sort of start jumping into the demos. As I mentioned to you, there are, or let me step back a bit. Let me go back to this particular thing. So step one, we had our APIs enabled in the GCP project, and we enable the MCP server endpoint also. So the step three is where we are, which is how do we set up the right IAM permission. So think of this as two gates. The first gate says that in order for you to even invoke the MCP tool, now order for you. So let me again clarify, what is this you? The you in this case is actually the AI agent. The AI agent, for example, is using the Google credentials that I'm logged in, or it could even be a service account in your case, if you're deploying it in a different fashion. So basically, that's the account it's going to be using. So that account needs to have the first role, which is, the role, that's the first gate, the mcp.tool user. This is a new role that has been introduced. So you must have that role given to the principal. So it could be a service account or your own account. And this allows it to at least invoke the tool. That's the first gate. So that's the MCP access, you get that. But then remember, if your tool is doing something like a create instance, or in this case, it's like a BigQuery MCP and you want to view the data. So as you know from GCP's constructs, that account or the principal will need to have that respective role too. Otherwise, it will be like it's forbidden. You're not allowed to, or there'll be an API error that you don't have access to it, or you're not allowed to invoke or see those kind of things. So two-step process is there over here. One is that you need to have the principal assigned the role, which is the mcp.tool user. This is important for just crossing the point that, okay, I can invoke the tool. But depending upon what the tool does, where if it updates instances of Compute Engine, or in this case, BigQuery, that respective role also has to be given, so that it's step one, step two, and then you're good to get the data and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind. At the same time, there's a lot more to just saying, okay, these are just some two permissions I should set and we should be done. Since it's within the GCP realm of things, as you know, there is organization, there is folders, and then instead of that, there are projects, etc. So you also have ways by which you could set, for example, organization policies that, okay, just ensure that nobody is just allowed to invoke the MCP tools, or certain kinds of, I would say folders or certain kinds of projects are only allowed. All of this stuff, you can actually configure. Model armor is also there. You want to go further, then obviously you want to also protect things, for example, prompt injection and things of that nature. This is a bit, I would say, a little bit beyond the scope of what we are going to be discussing today. But keep in mind that all of your existing Google Cloud project security knowledge, you can apply in similar fashions over here. Yeah. So given that, right, I want to now sort of trigger this whole thought process in you that, okay, these are all MCP tools, but now what could be ways by which you could start prompting these, right? So these could be individual MCP servers also that you start talking to, right? Tron will also see if there's a way by which we'll even combine these into some clever ways. So first up, right, these are just some examples I'm showing. So for example, take database automation. Don't worry about database automation and all those words, but just look at the prompt. So we are saying create an employees collection in the default database and populate with sample data. I've intentionally kept it a bit ambiguous over here because I wanted you to start thinking that here what I'm trying to actually say is you've heard about Firestore database, you heard about it's a document-based database, it's got collections, and it's also got a default database. So just think of here, what I'm trying to say is that in a Firestore's default database, go ahead and create an employees collection and populate it with sample data. And trust me, this sort of stuff actually works because behind the scenes, it will list a database. It will use the list database tool to know, hey, do we have a default database? If yes, is there an existing employees collection? If not, I'll create it. And then I'm also being told to populate it with some sample data. So probably I'll create those objects or records with some sample, I would say, attributes like maybe an employee ID, first name, last name. So all of this stuff it does. Similarly, look at log analysis, the second one out there, right? If you're familiar with cloud logging, you've got an MCP server for it. Now imagine what you could do. Typically today, if there's a problem, of course, if you automated it, great, right? But otherwise, you end up saying, okay, I'll go to the logging, cloud logging or the logs explorer. Inside that, I'll do a bit of filtering. Then I'll find out what the error is. Then I'll start guessing what the error might actually be pointing to. But what if I could actually say, hey, look at my last 5 error logs and generate a table with resolutions. Now, resolutions, again, these are not the exact prompts I want, which we will eventually use, but just what do you mean by resolution? Where do you think the resolution could come from? So we even got a developer knowledge server, an MCP server that exposes a complete corpus of Google developer documentation from things like cloud, Android, Firebase, web, you name it. So think of a scenario now. I could extract out the logs from my logging explorer and then ask it to even look up developer knowledge, or basically that word is a bit confusing at times, developer knowledge. Think of it like a documentation server that contains the latest, greatest documentation along various products, across various products, and then it gets you the resolutions too. Similarly, look at the third scenario, which is just saying, find me some requests in this database and then do an emailing and then even mark them. So literally you're doing a select statement out here with some filtering. Then maybe you're calling some other tool for emailing it out. And then you're even updating maybe a column again in each of those rows and marking the status as sent or something like that. So in all these scenarios, think of it this way. If I don't give you the MCP servers, your fallback typically might be that, okay, I'll need to find out the APIs. I'll need to then integrate it, use a programming language that is, that's, your favorite maybe, or what you're comfortable with, create all of these integrations, write my SQL queries, whatnot. Think of how much of your work actually goes away. I'm not saying this is the only way you can do it, but I'm just saying that potentially, and as you'll see the examples later, why the natural language queries, it gets pretty powerful and would save you a lot of integration headache that you would typically need to do. I'm just hoping that this starts giving you some ideas of what you could do, because in isolation also, each of these MCP servers are useful or is useful. But when you combine them together, you can actually, like you can see, I'm just piping or using it in a sense. I'm saying from my logs, get me the last 5 errors. And then for each of the errors, go and even look up the documentation and tell me if there are possible resolutions. You can actually be even more ambitious than what I've tried to do over here, which is to say, once you know a resolution, maybe tell me what's the gcloud command to do that. And then who knows, maybe you want to even make it actionable and say, even run it for me. So potentially you could take it to any extent that you want, but all via natural language. That's the main point which I'm trying to make over here. So again, I think I showed this a bit earlier, but let's see. So the configuration part I've shown you I've got these MCP servers that are already configured. Now, I'll just come out of this for a moment because I want to start jumping into a few things, right? Which is, again, I'll share this GitHub. There's some more stuff that I'm going to be adding. But what I've created here is a set of very initial, I would say, basic prompts, right? Which is sort of get you started with it. So once you are able to configure these MCP servers, obviously the first thing you want to do is that, hey, let me just see, are these really working? What are some of the very basic prompts that I could start giving? So I've just put a few. We're not going to be running all of these, but hopefully it will give you a sense of how it's all done. So for example, right, let's take something of this sort, which is add a new document to the users collection in my default, say, Firestore database with the fields as so and so, right? Now, I'll just copy this prompt for now, but I'll also show you that I'm in my GCP console, and let's say I'm going to go to Firestore, and in Firestore, I'm in my default database, and obviously I've got a few, what do you call, collections out here. Now, what does this one say? It's saying collection is users collection. So I don't have that at the moment. Even if you had it, it would be fine. But now let's see what happens. So I'm going to take this prompt as is. Now you get a sense of what should actually happen, which is that, okay, it should add a users collection, then maybe add a new document. So one document to that with some sample fields. So we are going to go back to my Gemini CLI. And in this, obviously, let me see, Firestore, as you can see, the MCP is ready. And these are all the tools that are currently exposed. So you can now get a sense that what it will try to do. It may try to list the databases that is the default database there. If it's there, then it's going to probably, look at, say, add a document, let's say, and probably it will combine these tools in some way to do that. If it was there, not there, or any other things which you do, it would accordingly pick the right tools. So let me just go back and just clear this whole thing, and I'm going to give this, that is add a document to the video, and there you go. So obviously it's going to do a few clever things, which is the project. We've not specified something, so I'm expecting that CLI tries its best to find out, and it's going to, I have the G Cloud, so it's got the right command that it wants to do. I'm going to allow it. This probably spits out the project ID. So now it knows it needs to go into that project ID, see Firestore API enabled, etc., etc. All those things are done, but see what's happened next. So our prompt said add it to the users collection of the default database. So obviously it's trying to do a few checks, that is the database even there in the first place? And for that, it's sort of pointing out, I'm going to be using this and list databases. Let's go on. So let it make its own judgment in terms of finding out all databases. Then it says, okay, that seems to be there. So now it's saying I'm going to be adding so-and-so document to it, right? So Firestore MCP and add document. So again, we go ahead, let it do its work. And now it's added that one document and sort of done that. So while it's probably going to just complete it in a moment, I'm just going to go over here. Where are we? Okay, databases, then the default one, and then it's got the users now with that one. So this just shows to you behind the scenes. Nothing, I would say game changing and all those words which are often used nowadays. It's standard stuff out here that, via natural language, you could go ahead and do its stuff. And this probably ends up over here. Similarly, let's go back to trying out maybe. So again, I've got several prompts here which you can later on even try. Some of them are even to do, for example, see, create a new, with a machine type specified, a compute engine VM instance in a certain zone. I've also specified what should be some of the APIs and permissions. So this is all okay. Similarly, there are some GKE type prompts out here. Now, let's say maybe the Cloud SQL one, right? What kind of databases do I have in my projects? So I could do this. This should then go ahead and get me the Cloud SQL MCP. I'm just throwing a few prompts showing you how all of these are possible here. So again, Cloud SQL MCP list instances. Keep in mind one thing, that in case you do not set the right permissions, or the MCP tool user, or whatever be the right IAM roles are not set for that particular account, you will obviously see an error from this. But keep in mind that you're using Gemini CLI or using an AI agent, that's going to also try a few other methods in order to make the stuff work. So be aware and careful if you're going to keep this in some kind of automated fashion to say, because this will try and see if there's some other way it can use maybe some G-Cloud command, maybe enable some service, etc., and so on, right? So in this case, I mean, anyway, I've enabled all the services, so this should just go and hit the three instances which I have. I know the three instances, so that's what it's showing you. But otherwise, if we were here, just as a little check, um, these things work. So, but I'm just showing you so that you can just relate. So these are my three instances. You can even start, stop, and all of that stuff too. Now, uh, let me see if there's anything more. Okay, let's do this. Fetch the last 50 logs with a severity of error from cloud logging for this project, right? So let's do something of that sort too. I'm not going to be running all 10 of these. It'll just take up time, but at the same time, you get the picture that I'm just invoking or just exercising a few of these. So here, see, it's done the list log entries from the logging MCP server. And it's got a bunch of stuff that I had just simulated a while back. And of course, we've only got the logs, but think of it this way. I'll show you a use case later on where we will not just take these logs, but then we will also say, hey, what does this error mean? Can I go to the documentation, understand it, and maybe is there a resolution fix? We'll combine all of these things together too. So hopefully this gives you a sense of where we are going. We've sort of just shown you these MCP servers are there so far. So there's a huge range, a large range of services available now. Then we looked at, if I just go back for a moment into this 3-4 step thing of the project, APIs, MCP server endpoint, the right IAM permissions. I've configured stuff in my CLI, and I've just invoked a few of these prompts out there. Yeah. Now, going back to the slideshow or the presentation. So we were here where we were just going to, oh, sorry, we just did working with a few MCP servers via a few sample prompts. The next few slides which I have, this is again to get you thinking in terms of, I'll take you through some 7, 8, MCP servers that are there. And most of the time, it makes sense that, okay, this MCP server, for example, if you see a Cloud SQL MCP server, you would know, okay, it's probably something to do where it will give me some tools to, let's say, manage the database in a natural language and so on, right? But I'm just going to go through now some 7, 8 servers, and then we'll look at some real use cases after that. So again, developer knowledge MCP server, this is the problem that it's trying to solve. This is actually a very key server, if you ask me, because this opens up a very interesting set of, I would say, use cases which you can think of. So for example, we know that often, and I'm sure all of you have faced this, you ask the AI agent to generate some code. It's obviously been so confident and generated a code for you, but you found probably it's an older version or it's some code which really doesn't even exist. And you then end up debugging all of that stuff. And then there are also other MCP servers that we know of, like Context 7, for example, that points to the latest, version or a certain version of a documentation. And then we say, hey, you make sure that you give us the recent or the documentation that I want the AI agent to be grounded to. So Google has addressed this now by making sure that the corpus, right? It calls something called documentation corpus. So let me just go back, and I've just put the link over here. So what is the documentation that's currently exposed, available? Now, documentation does not mean just some getting started or installation. It contains architecture guides, best practices, most importantly, code samples and things like that also. But also look at the corpus reference. So you've got the AI Google Dev, you've got Android, Chrome, you've got the cloud documentation, Firebase, OneWeb, and so on. Obviously, this is not a final list. You'll obviously be, if you're very particular, there's 1 or 2 that you'll say, oh my goodness, it's not even there in this list as of now. But yes, hopefully it gets added to it. The data freshness, as you can see currently, it's probably at some particular rate. So the idea is that it updates this index, every whatever 1 to 2 days. So there might be a little bit of a lag, but hopefully that's what it is. And I'm just hoping that this becomes, smaller and smaller, the refresh rate at which the index or re-indexing really happens. But think of Okay, no problem. So going back to the presentation here, right? The whole idea of this developer knowledge server is that you don't want to guess, you don't want to be in a situation that the AI agent is not able to predict or not able to tell you, in other words, the latest documentation or the example that really works for a version, etc. Right? So it's got some pretty nice two tools which it uses behind the scenes when after your natural language prompt is given. Search document, so it creates the query for you, and then get document goes and gets that specific one. So think of it this way, like we talked about the logs, right? So the sample prompt says, given this error, search this documentation, and then give me a summary of how to fix it. So literally, we will see a little later how all of this works. But some other examples I could give you are you're hosting an event on the weekend, and the weekend is the event is about, let's say, Cloud Run. So you can literally say, hey, I would like to send some material for people to know about Cloud Run before they come to the event. So you can use this MCP tool and just say, give me some getting started guide or an overview of Cloud Run, create this document, and then send it out to people, things like that. So we'll come to that. Even code generation, right? It's a great way. For example, even if you're onboarding certain employees in your organization or team who are responsible to learn more about a certain service in Google Cloud, you could just send them some material directly from here that says, this is how you get started with this service, these are the code samples, etc., etc. And it's at least documentation, or you can say results that are grounded in the latest documentation that's out there. The next one, cloud logging. Again, keep in mind this screens which you're seeing, I've just highlighted a few tools. These are not the full list of tools that the MCP server has, but it's just to make you aware of what could be key tools that you could expect from an MCP server and which are actually there. Cloud logging MCP server, it's all about connecting to your logs. It's got one interesting tool called list log entries. If you've been using cloud logging for a while, you would know there's a very funny type query language where you can give the query filters and so on. And it's not very easy, but now you'll find that literally you can give some of those your requirements in natural language, and it does a pretty good job of then creating the right filters and getting out to you. For example, log names, or the account of them, or specific errors, or even a JSON value. If you're logging JSON objects into your logs, you can say for that value equal to this, and it can even get that. So in this case, I've got very specific checkout service logs. That's a log name under which I'm just saying from there, go and get me the last 5 error logs. Imagine now combining this with developer knowledge server. I've actually seen people now beginning to even do automated kind of support to some extent. So for example, they would be getting a Google Sheet. They've got an MCP server for Google Workspace that goes and gets the entries which people have sort of reported as issues. It goes and picks those up. Then for each one, it goes to a developer server, gets the resolution and suggested fix or things like that, or even any other knowledge-based document is then sent to the user and so on. So pretty interesting stuff you could do. The whole point of this scenario here is we are used to going to the logging server, looking at the error, taking out the error text, pasting it probably in some other Q&A site, or maybe even some other place where you want to search, and then you get some results. Here now, in one single way, or one single prompt, you can actually execute this whole workflow. Firestore, we've seen a bit of 1 or 2 of these tools, but really managing Firestore databases, whether it's creating databases, documents, and so on. And we'll see the examples, but literally give a collection or give a document or give some particular values for that. It can search, it can even update, you can even migrate stuff. So for example, you can say for all the documents in this collection, please add an additional field, or please drop this field, or please compute this extra field, and so on, right? So all of this stuff is now perfectly possible via the MCP server. BigQuery, again, it's amazing in a sense. You will see that it's got enough knowledge to actually translate your prompt. So for example, how did sales in Northeast region compare to the Southwest last quarter? Now it's pretty interesting here. Like, how does this get translated to the right SQL query, and on which data set? How did it know which sort of fields, or you can say columns and their data types, etc., the schema? How did it know all of that? So it cleverly uses several of the tools one after the other. So first it will find out what's the data sets out there, description of those, does it map really to the kind of queries you're asking? It will find out which tables are there, it gets the table info, the schema, and then it cleverly creates a SQL, and then it uses the execute SQL to actually do that. So again, keep in mind, while it does all of these things, it could get a bit tricky in terms of how many calls it's making, the tokens it's using, the latency that could come up. So keep all of those things in mind. It sounds all cool, but also be practical in terms of, how much this is all going to eventually cost you to do, especially if it's like very heavily used. But the power is there, as you can see. Maps, again, straightforward. It can allow you to search for places, compute the routes, look up weather, and actually it can even combine several things together. So for example, look at the prompt that's out there, which just says, I'm planning a drive from here to here. So basically two locations, right? So it's going to search those places, find their coordinates or whatever it is. Then you're saying it's a drive. So it's even then going to call the compute routes between these 2 points. Then it's going to use the lookup weather. So literally that one prompt has translated into several tools that it cleverly combines from this MCP server and does it, right? So that's the power. GKE MCP server, again, it doesn't have all the power that you would expect it to do, but these are initial releases. That's why you will find a few sort of, I would say, primitives that are available to you, mostly around getting the cluster information, node pool information, super specific configuration YAMLs, and any kind of operations that could be running, in that cluster. You can see some of the sample prompts that are out there. Similarly, GCE, again, is very interesting. In a sense, it's a little bit more than what you saw from a GKE perspective, because GKE underlying anyway is GCE, but GCE on its own is very powerful. In a sense, it's not just about creating, managing the instances or listing instances, but you can actually even find out what's the current instance machine type, and if you've got access to, let's say, your machine usage, or the how much percentage of it is getting used, etc., or probably if you're hitting some memory limits or not hitting them, you could literally get other machine types slightly lower, slightly higher, and even update or set instance machine type to a newer one. So there are a couple of interesting blogs folks have written, where literally in the middle of the night, if your machine is or instance is hitting some sort of limits, from that you can actually find out what's the next higher machine type, and then update an instance therein, or at least begin the process of doing that. You also see some sample prompts that are out here. Cloud SQL, again, managing the SQL databases available for, so if I just go back to supported products, you will see, of course, there's AlloyDB for Postgres, but then you also have Cloud SQL and across all the tree flavors that are out there. So pretty much covers various operations that you could do, including, most importantly, of course, is the execute SQL. So look at it this way, right? You can create a Postgres database. You can even add an additional column, or maybe fire an SQL query via just natural language. So pretty much powerful. I mean, if you have to just maybe even do sometimes a few things around maintaining some records or tables, or just moving from one to another, you could possibly come up with ways by which now, by natural language, you're able to manage these things. Okay, so quite a bit of stuff. And now comes the most interesting part, which is to just show you several use cases and how all of these things come together. I've got 7, 8, and probably I'm writing more also, so I'll keep all of these available to you as we go along. But we'll see if we can at least cover 3 or 4 such uh, use cases today, and then we'll take up questions. So again, keep in mind at a very high level, Gemini is still playing all of these, I would say orchestration role. So we are in Gemini CLI, but then behind the scenes, it's the model which will then interpret what your prompt is and then figure out which tools are available, which one to call, combine all of that stuff. This is again just giving you a very big picture with a few MCP servers, nothing major happening here. Now, I'm going to start creating or at least show you a few scenarios. Now, just for everyone's information, I'll be sharing some of these guides also, which actually show various, I would say, these scenarios which have been created. Have I come up with each one of these scenarios of my own? Are these original to me? Of course not. I have put some things together, and then I have actually, just to be very open with all of you, these are some interesting scenarios that I asked Gemini to even come up with. So there were a few where I gave it some pointers that this is what I'm wanting to do. But then I also explained to Gemini, I've got all these MCP servers, this is what they can do. And here are some scenarios I would like to try out. And then it sort of worked together with me to come up with these scenarios. So keep in mind that it's completely okay. And I would really encourage that while you're doing some of these things, use Gemini or any other, I would say, tool that's required. Of course, ground it with the documentation. So the way I went about to even generate some of these scenarios was, of course, I have some idea of what I want to do. That's most important. But then I also gave it the right documentation, what kind of tools are there. And then there was a few times back and forth to sort of say, okay, this is how it will eventually work. So I've nailed down a few after a few iterations with it, and these are quite interesting ones. So first up, right, tech support DevOps. I think we've seen some kind of stuff that's going on here. But now if you look at it, right, I want to combine 2 MCP servers here, which is cloud logging, which is where my errors would go, and obviously developer knowledge MCP server. So what I want to do is look at the prompt right now, right? Of course, business problem is straightforward, that a sudden spike in errors is happening, right, on our checkout service. So people are complaining that there's a problem out there. And is there something that we could possibly dig? So the way you would typically go about is, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, you've got the right automations, dashboards, alerts, monitoring in place, good for you. But otherwise, the way you would go about is someone says, this service is having a problem. Now, I know from my code it's probably going in some certain log names under which I'm putting this. So I'll go to Logging Explorer, I'll check out the logs and so on, right? So just before I even fire this prompt, let's do a few things. So let's say I'm in logging and this is my logs explorer, and under log names, I'm going to go to the checkout service logs. I'm just going to apply this. What does it come up? Okay, so that's fine. I'm just going to extend the time by whatever. Let's increase this so that I've not generated logs just right now or as it's happening. So there were a few logs that were generated earlier in the day. So just think of it this way, that your app is being accessed by users, something is happening, and the errors are getting logged. And I'll just put this under the log name, so it's just easier to filter out what's happening. Obviously, keep in mind that Cloud Assist in Google Cloud also has some ways by which you can investigate the logs, etc., etc. So it's absolutely fine if you prefer that way also. But now start looking at the prompt that I wanted to show you. So if you look at this prompt again, now I'm saying fetch the last 5 error logs from the checkout service logs. Extract the specific error message from the JSON payload, right? So if I again go back to there, you will see for each of these messages, there is a JSON payload and there is a error, out there. So I wanted to extract that. Of course, any of the other fields also you could extract. And then I want you to also search in the developer documentation for troubleshooting this specific error in, let's say, whatever it is, and give me a summary of how to fix it, right? So literally the flow is fetch the logs, extract the details, do some research, which is developer knowledge, and then synthesize that in some way or the other. So I am going to go to this part and just take this prompt out here. I'm going to go to minimize CLI, or let's do this. I'm just going to clear up this session so that it even forgets what the Google Cloud project is. I'm going to put this out here. And ideally, or let me put it this way, if I once again show you the MCP list, there's the logging MCP server, which is ideally, I want the list log entries to do it. Of course, log names and other things also it may use. And then I've got the developer knowledge server to search and get that specific documents, depending upon what the error is. Right? So let's clear, let's put this and let's go ahead. So first, obviously, is going to say, I need to know what the project is. So it's going to once again kick off the gcloud config list to just get the project ID. Let it do that. I found it a few times that it, okay, so let's see how it goes this time. So it's got my project ID. And the next thing it's going to do is it's telling that, okay, you're talking about checkout service logs, the log name and cloud logging, and get me the last 5 errors, right? So it takes a bit of time at times, and I hope I don't run out of Gemini 3 or any other quota. It's a bit slow for me in the last 1-2 days, but hopefully we'll do fine. Okay, so it's going to go and say, okay, I'm going to call the list log entries tool. I could have just done allow everything for this session, but I'm doing it intentionally so that you can see it, play out. So you're seeing now that it's got the errors, right? And once it gets the errors, it's going to go to these, maybe collect the error field which was there, depending upon what the error text is. And now see, it's going to go and start hitting the developer server, and it's come up with a query. And this is what I'm trying to tell you, that sometimes it's taking only a certain word. Sometimes it creates a whole statement. We can of course influence it in some way, but let's see. So it's going to now hit the developer knowledge. So it's not got any documents right now here. So it will start creating some different kinds of queries also, depending upon the text. I could have influenced it in the prompt, but I'm just kept it as open-ended to see how it's behaving. So again, connection. So now it's added the word cloud run, connection pool exhausted. If it finds something, no, it's not found something. Sometimes this is feedback for even our folks to see whether is there a documentation of that sort. Now see, it's done cloud run, connection pool exhausted, troubleshooting. Hopefully it gets, good, it got something from the doc server. So hopefully now it takes some of this, it synthesizes it and gives me some kind of a report. Thanks for all of you who are answering some of the questions. So thanks for that. Can't do both things. Towards the end, we can still have a bit of chat around this. Okay, so let's see it coming together. So basically, we are at a point where we hit the. Okay, it's again trying to do some more search. Let it do. We could again influence this, but we've just said go to the logs, get me these errors, pick out the error text, search in the respective developer knowledge. And again, here is now come up with unable to acquire a connection. Okay. It's live, so that's the good thing. Okay. So based on a few queries that it's got from the developer knowledge server, at least the results, it's now you can see that the specific error was so and so in your JSON payload. And then based on the documentation, it's given you a few suggestions. This is all from the documentation. Remember, my prompt was something like this, but I could have even said, please also provide the citations or the links to the documentation for any answer that you give. So this way, of course, it's got it from there, but at least it will say for more information, go to this link, and that will lead you directly to the documentation also, right? So this is the one use case I wanted to show. Next one, let's go here back. So tech support, DevOps. Obviously, you can do a lot more. You could even write this in an automated way to keep looking for some logs. You could even create, a report, send it out by email if you configure those other tools also. So it's all possible to keep improving this workflow. Empower sales team. Again, don't worry about all these, words out there, but think of it this way, that two MCP servers here. One is the Firestore and the other one is BigQuery. Now, this is about a service person who is going to go into a customer meeting. And for that, they would like to know that, okay, get me this customer's data. What kind of licenses do they have? What kind of tier they are on? And then what's the kind of usage they are having, so that they can have a more informed conversation, right, with the customer. So think of it this way. You actually got the client profile present in a collection in the Firestore database. And then from there, we'll find their ID and which tier they are on. Then we'll use the tenant ID to go to the logs where the usage is captured for that, right? So we'll actually go to API metrics usage logs to sum up their total. So think of it this way. You're actually combining two data sources and saying, I'm going to go into a meeting with this customer. Please tell me what's the plans they have, what is their current usage, and from two different sources, right? So if I just show you for a moment, there's BigQuery here, and this is my project. And okay, I can do the API metrics. It's got the usage logs, and if we do a simple query on this, for now it's okay. Just got two records. So I've got the tenant ID, which is the 994, and it's got these how many calls they're making. So really, I want this to be summed up for 97,000. That's the total usage this customer is having. Similarly, if I go back to the Firestore data, okay, I can leave this to Firestore. Let me go to the default database and what was the clients and so on and so on. Okay, so let me go to clients, the Acme Corp, and this is the tenant ID, right? So I'm actually going here first, getting the tenant ID, then using the tenant ID to then hit the BigQuery database. So let me go back to this prompt, and I go back to my. Okay, so basically supposed to now hit these two MCP servers. First one, it validates via Firestore whether this document is there. If document is there, read that record. So, get document on that, correct? And you can see the document, so and so, the values are there. So yeah, go ahead. Once it gets the document, I'll get the tenant ID from there. Once I know the tenant ID, I'm going to now hit the BigQuery MCP server to actually sum up all the usage or the number of API calls. Again, think of it this way. You can even have customer notes or last meeting, last 3-4 meetings, what's happened. And you can even keep that in Firestore, for example. So here is doing execute SQL. So you can even do something more fancy here. That, okay, if you're going into a meeting with this customer, here are the last 3-4 meetings, whatever the notes are there. This is their current plan. This is their current usage. A nice way, just a simple, I would say, natural language query, and boom, you have all of this information. Okay, so here we go. It's a short summary that's made, but then and then the total that also is done, right? Great. So we go now to let's do 2-3 more and see how it goes. Next one. Marketing campaign health. Again, this is a slightly different one, which is that as a organization, you sort of released a campaign, and you want to make sure that that campaign is having any errors or not. But again, don't worry about the business problem too much. The thing that we are trying to do here is that go and see in particular cloud logging also if what are the last few logs, and for this particular campaign get the code, and if it is active, then yes, go to the logs, find out if there are any warnings or errors. So again, same way, it first goes into the Firestore database, figures out what the code is. So for example, campaigns, right? So is this campaign really on right now? So we are going to go to this, we're going to go to campaigns, Spring promo, this is the code, right? And it is true. And similarly, then if I go back to my logging, and in logging, here is, any kind of errors that are happening for that campaign. So I'm putting it inside of, let's say, the promo service logs. And what do we have? Here we go. So there are some things or the other that are happening. Let's take, I don't know how much data I have, probably a couple of records or a couple of entries only. So here you can see that there was some kind of a issue that had happened with this campaign. So I'm literally taking some values from there again. Now, instead of instead of BigQuery, you're also seeing now it's connecting now to your logs. So you're combining it in a slightly different way. In the first example, we had logs, we got the error, we looked at developer knowledge. In the other example, we looked at some Firestore, we got some values from there, and now we are going to search inside of logs, right? So again, there I'm going to go to check the campaign, and if it is true, then search cloud logging, right, for the last 50 logs, and tell me if you see anything for this promo code. So we go back to this. Okay, so it's first going to get the document, as we know, so that it knows that's the code, and it's also true. So if it is the code is there and the campaign is true, then go ahead and hit the logs, MCP server to filter out in that particular log name if there are any errors. So literally is doing quite a few things. So list the log entries again, and the filter is, it's given the filter as log name, and severity is warning or whatever, right? So as I told you earlier, if you've been using logging or logs explorer, you would know that there's a query language, but now the natural language, your requirement itself is formatted into those queries. So here it's got this, it's warning, it's found one warning, and promo engine timeout, and it's just giving you some kind of a decent summary. And that's pretty much what we were saying, right? It's like the promo engine, the timeout that's happening, and that's what it is out here. Next, what's the next one? Security threat hunting. Okay, so basically there's a suspicious IP, and so basically all the access is getting logged inside of BigQuery. So we're going to be flagging maybe some suspicious IP, and we are saying, hey, go ahead and check for in this particular table if this particular IP has tried to log in, how many times it has got a failed login attempt. And the next thing, now this is interesting. So one is to just find this out. But the other thing is now search the developer knowledge for any cloud armor rate limiting block IP. I know there is some feature like this, but I don't know exactly what. And that's why I'm saying go and search for this. And also give me the exact gcloud command syntax to block it. Now this gets powerful because you've not just done straightforward querying in some BigQuery table, but you've also said search for developer knowledge, and then most importantly, give me the exact command also. You could actually take it to even step 4 and say, even run it for me, right? But we're not doing that. So interesting now that we'll just go here and we'll just say our system is flagged so and so. First, go to BigQuery in the audit login events, go and search for, how many failed attempts have come in. and then of course then do the other stuff from the developer knowledge. So let's see how this goes. So security login, sorry, security audit. So let's see. While it does that, let's Magic will also do some other things. So there's the security audit and login events, and I'll just do a query on this. So there are a few IPs here, but then you've got 1, 2, and 3. This particular one has failed three times. So it's going to do its magic here to search. Sorry, so it's got those. See, if you see failed count, it's got the 3 of them. And now it's going to search cloud armor rate limiting block. Right? How do you do that? Give me the GCP command for that, because that's exactly what this prompt asked for. Get me developer knowledge for this, and then give me the exact cloud syntax. Hopefully, this starts giving you, or at least starts to demonstrate the power that's there to, create a lot of these workflows of this nature. And again, you have seen I have not written any code so far. It's pretty much happening on its own. So again, search document, so cloud armor, deny block, it's created that query well, and hopefully we get a command to do. You can run many of these things also in an automated way, but I've intentionally kept it so you can see what tool it calls. So it says I ran against so and so, there were 3 failed attempts, and then based on this, you got the following 2 options, and it's also given you the exact, uh, G-Cloud command to do that. Good. Next one. Again, let's maybe we don't need to execute all of this, but you see what sort of stuff is happening. Again, here we are evaluating a new rollout, and if latency has regressed, then the team needs to know optimization best practices. So we are literally seeing that, okay, I'm recording the query performance in a particular data set in BigQuery, find this and group by architecture. So V1, V2, whatever. And if the V2 is slower than the legacy one, the old one, then search developer knowledge for Firestore query performance, whatever, optimization, and summarize the tree top recommendations. So again, if I just, if I go back to these, we'll sort of get it that, and we'll just fire this while we see the other ones also. So again, here, go into the BigQuery data set, group it by architecture, because I've got my response times written for both the older one, legacy, as well as the V2. If V2 is slower, then probably I'm missing out something. You can see here the timings are coming. One of them is greater, so it's saying, hey, Firestore, get me the optimization practice. Again, you could look at the errors or issues or suggest what would be the things you want to optimize. I just give a very generic one that suggests to me how I could improve my or optimize my Firebase. So here you go. It's pretty much come back that the results of V2 were this, legacy was this, and it is indeed slower. And here are some top 3 recommendations from there. Yeah. I think we have a couple more, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, okay. So again, this is again with maps, it's pretty interesting. So you've got a scenario where you want to make a high priority delivery. And to do that delivery, of course, you've got delivery details where it needs to go to. But you also need to know, hey, drivers telemetry, where my drivers are, right? So-and-so driver, I know probably there somewhere. So go and get that person's latitude, longitude, find out where is my destination for the delivery I want to make, how far the driver is, from that distance, the driving route, etc. So pretty interesting. We're getting the driver's location, We're also knowing uh, where we want to deliver. So we need to also use maps to find out search location, etc. So it combines quite a few things, very neatly. So if I again look at this scenario, I can take this out and go for it. This is, I think, the last one we'll see, and then we'll sort of uh, stop, take a few questions, and so on. But you get the picture. I mean, you could generate several scenarios like that, and hopefully, you're also able to map it now to some things you may want to do in a similar fashion for your own data, for your own tables, and so on. This is the last one we'll do. So there's one more, but that's again pretty much similar. So this is again just getting the delivery details from the Firestore database. Once I have the delivery details for delivery 001, I know where it needs to get delivered, right? So for example, this is where it is. I want it to deliver. Then I'm also going to go and get the driver details. Sorry, some error happened. Okay, let's see. Action required. So it gets from driver telemetry where driver equal to 88. Sure, go ahead. It's got the driver telemetry, where the driver is right now. So now we've got the delivery details where we want to give. So we need to also get the latitude, longitude for the delivery details where it needs to go. We know the driver's latitude, longitude, so it can map to so it can compute the route basically. What's the duration, so and so. Pretty interesting. Now just think about the effort that could have gone if you had to just work with these APIs and sort of build out these applications. So here you go. It's saying delivery destination is so and so. The driver is currently. Those of you who are familiar with San Francisco might be able to uh, understand where these points are. And then it's a bit funny, 4:59 seconds. So of course you can write something in a prompt to make it better. But yeah, it's about a mile away. It's very close. So yeah. Okay, so I've got one more use case, but that's fine in interest of time. That's again same thing, like takes up Firestore, BigQuery, maps, and then combines where could be the proposed cafe location that makes sense for the attributes you are looking for. So in summary, right, we've seen quite a few things, and just key takeaways are that of course standardization matters here. MCP is a big plus over here that's made this whole thing possible in a universal common way. The servers that we discussed today are fully managed in Google MCP servers, right? So you just focus on the building part and just configure it, and you should be good. Security, while we didn't see too much of it, like I'll share some resources, but keep in mind that it's not just about the two gates, which is like, are you allowed to invoke the MCP tool? And secondly, do you have the right permissions to even then do what the tools are going to do? For example, create instance, so you should have the right IAM permission to create those instances and so on, right? So, and plus, as I said, there's model armor integration you could do organization policies, you could disable tools completely if you want to, should an organization want it that way, or even filter, include, exclude tools. All of those things are possible. And the key message I wanted to give out is, on its own also, each of these MCP servers are quite powerful, but the true power, as you would have seen via some use cases, and hopefully it triggers a lot more ideas in each one of you, is to combine this into more complex workflows.